Oof, oof. Pacers lose to the Hornets for the second time this season. They have too many of these stinky losses. What went wrong? Why couldn't they beat Charlotte? Why do they keep losing this game? And let's contextualize their run against bad opponents on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, y'all, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, oh boy, Pacers did it again. They did the thing that's made it extremely hard to evaluate what on earth this NBA basketball team is. They lost to a team that's won less than 30% of their games this season. It's the second time they've lost the Hornets this year. This time, no LaMelo Ball. Hornets are a very different looking team. They made some trade deadline acquisitions that improved their talent level. Let me finish this. I'm not saying what I'm about to say to excuse the Pacers. Every player they got at the trade deadline is offensively talented. Vasilija Micic, Seth Curry, Davis Bertans, Trey Mann, good scores, right? That didn't have anything to do with the game. The Pacers couldn't score on the Hornets. That's what made this so weird. New look Hornets team can't guard. They shouldn't be able to guard, and the Pacers had maybe their worst offensive game of the season, of the entire season. Just completely miserable how they played this game in Charlotte. And now they have another bad loss to add to their stack of bad losses. And I actually want to start there before we talk about whatever the heck happened in this basketball game. 102 points for the Pacers. Is what on earth is this Pacers team? I wanted to look it up before tonight, but tonight made me actually look it up because they did it again. I wondered how many teams have as good of a top end resume as the Pacers and as bad of a bottom end resume as the Pacers, right? Not to steal NCAA terms, but I don't keep up enough with college basketball to know exactly what the Sol is like, but people talk about quad 1 wins, right, for the NCAA tournament and quad 4 losses or whatever it is, right? What are the Pacers' quad 1 wins and quad 4 losses? And why does that make it so freaking hard to know who the heck this team is? Because the first thing I did after this game was jump off Twitter and I typed down every single loss for every team in the NBA to one of the bottom 5 teams. There are 5 teams in the NBA who have a winning percentage under 30% as of tonight. That'd be the Hornets, who just beat the Pacers, the Wizards, the Pistons, the Spurs, who also won last night, and the Blazers, who are 1 win away from not being sub 30% wins, but they're there. They're the best team of this group. Doesn't matter how good they are. So there's 5 teams in that group, right? Portland beat the Pacers twice. Charlotte beat the Pacers twice, and the Wizards beat the Pacers. The Pacers so far have not lost to the Spurs and Pistons, but they play 3 more against those teams. Either way, I typed down every single win that those 5 teams have this season in a list because I wanted to see who has the most losses in the NBA against those bottom 5 teams. And yep, it's exactly who you think it is. It's the Pacers. Of every team in the league, even of teams much worse than them. The Pistons only have 4 losses against that group. Obviously, they can't play themselves, right? That is the bottom of this group is Portland, Charlotte, Spurs, and Detroit. The Nets, who stink, right? The Nets are 21-31. They have 4 losses against that crew. Toronto, who stinks. They are the worst team that isn't in this group, 35.2 win percentage. I guess the Grizzlies are actually worse. Toronto has 4 losses against that group. Memphis has 3. The Pacers have 5. That leads the entire NBA. If they were 4-1 in those 5 games, not undefeated, 4-1, let's say 4-1, they would currently, instead of 30 wins, add 4. They'd be 34-21. They'd be 4th in the East right now, right? They would be half a game out of 3rd. If they went 4-1, not undefeated, 3-2 even gets them tied with the Knicks for 4th. Instead, they're 7th. They are now in the play-in spot after losing. The Magic have won 2 in a row. The Pacers are now 7th. They do not have the tiebreaker with Orlando right now. That's extremely significant. So that is, of course, extremely problematic. And they still have 3 more chances to add to that tally of 5. Only 22 teams have even lost to some of those teams. Pacers have lost 5 times to those teams. That would suggest they're bad. They're not a good team. On the other hand, let's add some context because I tweeted that the Pacers had the most losses against that crew. I ran the same analysis, but didn't tweet this about the top 5 teams, right? It wasn't as clean with the 30% win percentage. That's a clean number. The top 5 teams are all above 65%, and the Nuggets are the 6th best team 67%, and the Nuggets are the 6th best at 66.7. So just outside that group. So the top 5 is Boston, Cleveland, Minnesota, Los Angeles Clippers, and Oklahoma City Thunder, who the Pacers haven't even played the Thunder yet. Of the top 5 teams in the league, only 3 teams have more wins than the Pacers. Pacers have 4 wins against that crew. Only the Thunder, who are great, and then the Pelicans and Lakers have more wins than the Pacers against that crew. And what's ironic is that crew does not include Milwaukee, who has over 60% win percentage, and the Pacers have beaten 4 times. They're almost at 65% win percentage. The Knicks, who the Pacers have beaten twice. The Sixers, who the Pacers have beaten twice, right? Against the 60% win teams and better, the Pacers might be, I only did the top 5 and bottom 5, but the Pacers might be near or at the top. So what on earth is this team? That is the takeaway I have from this game before we actually talk about the basketball that's played, because that is an impossibly strange profile, right? If this team was trying to qualify for the NCAA tournament, it'd be like, well, they beat number 2 Kansas, and they beat I don't know how good every college team is. They beat number 2 Kansas, and they beat number 5 Marquette, and they beat number 7 UConn, and they lost to Purdue Fort Wayne, and they lost to Valpo. I'm just naming schools in Indiana. It doesn't make sense. It's very confusing. What is that team? What do you make of them? Does their top end wins matter more? Do their bottom end losses matter more? What is their total package? And so part of my thinking was like, what if this was more balanced? What would the thinking be about the Pacers, right? A lot of the optimists say of the Pacers, well, in the playoffs, I would be confident in the Pacers because they've beaten Boston twice. They've beaten Milwaukee for every team above them in the East, except now for the Magic. Every team above them in the East, they've beaten more than once, right? So in that view of the Pacers, as many have said, well, that their top end's great. I'm confident, blah, blah. On the other hand, a lot of people said, well, I've seen them lose to the worst teams a lot and look awful in those games. And this doesn't even include like that loss to the Bulls early in the season at home that was so miserable, right? This doesn't include that loss to the Raptors at home early in the season that was so miserable. I think there was a third one that was pretty bad, but not quite at that level. But they've had some ugly games this season. Like, what are they, that team? What is more of the anomaly? They have such a wide swath of results in terms of quality that it's really hard to say what are the Pacers. So if those were more balanced, if they had fewer wins against the best teams and more wins against the worst teams, and they were still 30-25, what would people think of the Pacers? I think they'd be thought of as a 30-25 team. But because there are such extreme results, there are some people who think they're not as good as 30-25. They're actually more like closer to last year's team. I've seen a lot of people say, they're going to end up with a similar record to last year. I've also seen people say, they've beaten the best of the best. They could rattle off a bunch of wins and, be 6th and maybe beat Milwaukee in the first round, and blah, blah, blah. And it's always somewhere in the middle between the two extremes when people are arguing on the internet, almost always. But I think it's an interesting thought exercise of where are the Pacers if they're in the middle of those two extremes? What do people think of this team? And the most common prevailing thought is that they play to the level of their competition. And tonight there was a lot of tweets that said the Pacers played down to their competition. That's not true because they play up to good teams, clearly. They just play to the level of their competition. And some people said that's a sign of immaturity. And I suppose I understand that because my word I used when I was like, immature, I don't know about that. I said it's because they're young. But then I was like, I guess that's kind of the same. You know what I mean? Like, I think they're mentally mature, but they're young. And so their prep for games is a little different. They don't have like a go-to, this is how we're going to win every game thing right now. So I suppose immature and young can be synonymous in this situation, but I don't think it's because they're immature. I think it's because they're inexperienced. And that's what I meant when I thought of young in my head. You need experience to know what it takes to be consistent every single night in the NBA, to be playing your absolute best. And they don't have that, right? Still over half the rotation is guys on rookie scale contracts. That is not an excuse. That is a fact. Being in your early stages of your NBA career makes you a worse player. This is not me saying that these guys should get a pass because they're young. This is me saying they're not as good as they will be because they're young. And so the Pacers lost again, and it is unacceptable. They have to beat the Hornets. They want to make the playoffs this year. Myles Turner just said that after the trade deadline. Everyone on the team has said it throughout the season. That's the most recent one I can think of. They want to make the postseason this year. They're good enough to do it. We've seen them beat great teams. At their peak, they're a great basketball team. They're a playoff quality Eastern Conference team. Good enough to win the series? I don't think so, but maybe. But they have losses like this that make you think, maybe not. Maybe the Bulls being 3.5 games behind them now for the 9th seed is something to talk about at some point. Instead of saying, they're within 3 of 5th, they're actually within 3.5 of 9th. So I don't know what to make of the Pacers, and losses like this are why it's so hard to contextualize what this team is. Because any night, anyone can show up. They have very rarely totally stomped an awful team, right? That has been a rare thing. Early season, they smoked the Spurs at home, right? Mature thing to do. They smoked the Wizards at home on opening night, although opening night's a little different. They beat the Jazz by 16 at home before the Jazz got good. That was impressive stuff. They had that Celtics loss where they got smoked by Boston in Boston. That was without Tyrese Haliburton. But they also have very few against awesome teams where they get smoked at the same time, which I think is fair. Golden State last week was probably the worst game against an awesome team they've had. Or they're not even awesome. They're not even in the play-in. But you get what I'm saying. Or the Orlando game at home earlier this season maybe, but very few. The only one that comes to mind for me is Minnesota, the end of that road trip when they just got thumped in Minnesota. And I'm sure I'm missing some. They lost by like 20 against Boston that one time. But, that is just what makes it so hard. It's so hard to pin down the quality of this team because they have so many games that are so, exciting. They beat a great team. That's wonderful for their outlook. They feel great about it. They're riding the high. They think they can beat anybody. They talk like a team that is so proud of that win. And then they lose to the Hornets twice in one season. And they didn't even look like they had a chance a lot of this game in the second half. They were hovering right there and in it. There were a ton of lead changes. They themselves were tied. I think they were ahead in the fourth quarter. They might have just been tied. They should have beat the Hornets, and they didn't. Yeah, they were never ahead in the fourth quarter. They were only tied. They were ahead in the third quarter, but they never got a bigger lead than 7, which was the first quarter. Ugly game. We will talk about the actual basketball game, but I just wanted to opine with some stats and research that I threw together myself about why it's so hard to figure out the level of this Pacers team. And I think their inexperience shines when you really look at their NCAA tournament resume. I think they'd get picked to be in the top 16 because of their best wins, but 30-25, I think, is a good representation of the Pacers because they are being pulled in many different directions when you look at their record. And in that way, maybe their record's fine and they'll continue to win at about that rate for the rest of the year. 5-5 in their last 10, one more before the All-Star break, but they can't have this happen again. They're playing a Raptors team on Wednesday that just got spanked by the Spurs. Let's talk Pacers Hornets. Why did the Pacers look so woeful against the lowly Hornets? 102 points. Crummy for the Pacers. We got to talk about that and much more on today's Locked On Pacers podcast. But first, we have to talk about Prize Picks Daily Fantasy Sports Made Easy. Fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. What you do is simple. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. They've got some new features. It's demon time on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into 1,000. Demons and Goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons and green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. They even have injury insurance policies. So if your player gets hurt, you stay in the game. It's really simple to play. You can do it in like a minute. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay. And of course, all you got to do is say, is Kevin Durant going to score more than or less than 28 points? For example, among many things, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. It's code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100 at Prize Picks Daily Fantasy Sports Made Easy. And we are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Go check out Locked On Hornets for your second listen. Hear about the apparently defensive juggernaut that is the Seth Curry, Vasily Micic, Davis Bertans, Charlotte Hornets. They got Grant Williams. He's an okay defender. That is, they're a new look team, and all their new look should be offensive stuff. They got some good shooters. None of their new look should have anything to do with defense or kicking butt on the glass, and that is why the Pacers lost this game. Let's just run through some very, very high-level numbers to talk about the Pacers and their output in this game. Prior to tonight, the Pacers had scored less than 110 points 10 times this season. They lost every single one of those games. Add this one to the list. They're now 0-11 at under 110. They're actually 0-14 at under 112. So they were doomed with that alone. 102 is their second lowest output of the season. It is their lowest in a game that Tyrese Haliburton played. They had a 101 in that game in Boston where they got rocked by 50-something points. Oh, no, the Boston one where they didn't have Haliburton, they had 104. Just kidding. They played Boston at home with Haliburton and scored 101. So I just lied 2 seconds ago. Wrong Boston game. Either way, they scored 101 against Boston in January, 102 tonight for their second lowest of the season. What numbers are the reason for that? Number one, awful from 3, 8 for 30. Haliburton was good from 3. He hit 3 for 8. Obi Toppin was 2 for 4. Everyone else was a combined 3 for 20 or 3 for 18. That will not do it. Nobody else made more than 1. All 3 came from the Pacers starting front court. Nesmith got 1, Siakam got 1, and Turner got 1. Everybody else missed every 3 they took. Doug McDermott, 4 wide open ones for the new Pacer. All go in and out. Maybe I think one of them was just a normal miss. 3 of them went halfway down and came out. That's not it's not trying to make it sound better. He missed the shots, but Doug McDermott 0 for 4 from deep, and that killed the Pacers. They shot 50% from the field. That's pretty good. They could not make threes. The Hornets were 10 for 34 from deep and were 3% better from long range than the Pacers. The Pacers stunk at the free throw line. So actually, let's contextualize 8 for 30 for the Pacers this season. 8 made threes is tied for their 6th worst of the season. And in every game they made less than 8, only twice did they take more than 33. So that 3-point percentage of 26.5 ranks 9th worst of the season there. Free throws, bad for the Pacers. 10 for 16, really rough in the first half. They made more percentage-wise in the second half, but they didn't take very many. 16, not very many free throws. Not a very foul-happy game from either team. Only 32 total free throws. 10 made free throws for the Pacers is 8th worst this season. That percentage of 62.5 is 6th worst for the Pacers this season. So that stands out to me as like efficient stuff. Free throws, threes, good ways to get some points. For a generally efficient Pacers offense, they should be making those. They didn't make them. Sometimes it's a make or miss league and you miss. I'm not excusing the Pacers missing shots. That's a reality. And I still think that's not the number that I think is why they lost. The number that I think is why they lost and why they had such a low output of points is offensive rebounds. The Pacers had 2 total the entire game. And one of them was Tyrese Haliburton, and the other one was Obi Toppin, right? Toppin's a decent rebounder, but not the guys you'd expect to be hitting the glass hard. The Hornets only had 5 offensive rebounds, but they had 46 boards in total to the Pacers 32. They just cleaned up the Pacers' misses. Pacers had a lot of one-and-done possessions, and when you miss so many threes and miss free throws, you need extra chances, and they did not get them. They had 2 offensive rebounds. That is their lowest of the season, number 1 lowest of the season. A lot of their low offensive rebound games are games that they shoot well, right? The only 2 times before this they were under 5 offensive rebounds was when they beat the Heat in Miami without Haliburton and shot 66%, and when they beat the Kings in Sacramento without Haliburton and shot 55%, right? They don't get a lot of offensive rebounds in those games because they made a lot of shots. In fact, in their 5 worst offensive rebound games, they shot very well, over 50% in all of them, and they were over 50% in this game, but not so far over that they should have gotten 2 offensive rebounds. They needed more chances. And they got some because the Hornets turned it over a bunch. Pacers actually took 1 more shot than the Hornets in this game, but the Hornets made more threes and more twos. And so this was all about efficiency, and the Pacers didn't give themselves possession chances in a game where they were getting out-efficiencyed. That's a very low-level way of looking at the numbers, but they had so many things statistically that were bottom 5, bottom 10, bottom 1 in the case of the offensive rebounds numbers for their season. And that is generally a good place to look, right? Making 34 2-pointers, good stuff. 31 assists on 42 makes, that's great. Only 11 turnovers, you'll take that. 9 steals, good stuff, right? That is a lot of good numbers. Only 11 fouls. Like, they played a clean game. They just did not make any shots or give themselves extra chances to make up for all their misses. That is an ugly formula, and that is not a formula you can have against the Charlotte Hornets. The Charlotte Hornets, whose only thing is trying to guck it up, right? They didn't have anyone go crazy in this game. Their top scorer was Myles Bridges with 20. Grant Williams had 21. Their top scorer was Grant Williams with 21. That shouldn't have done it. Pacers should have won this game. by talent alone, they were favored by more than 10 points. But they should have found a way to either get some extra efficiency or get some extra possessions, and they could not do it. They could not do it. And there is a lot of players worth talking about in this loss. The Pacers starting front court, awesome. Andrew Nembhard, pretty good. Everybody else could have been better, left something on the table, left a lot to be desired. We have to talk about all of it. They went to bench Shepherd for energy in a game they needed it so bad. So much to talk about with individual performers in this game and the Pacers bench in general. Stinking it up. We'll talk about all that to close out today's show. But first, this episode is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need an opportunity to get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased off your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You might be thinking the same thing this week. And I think most people think this way in some ways. My goodness, do I hate NFL overtime rules? I know they changed it for the Super Bowl, but I didn't actually know that until the Super Bowl was happening. I like that a lot better. I think getting the ball second has a lot of value. Man, do NFL overtime rules stink. There should be no ties in any sport, first of all. And that is where college football does it right. You hopefully agree with me. But therapy can be different for everyone, even people who think NFL overtime is great. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports teams or rules in pro sports. It's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. And if you visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA, you'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sixers because, one, the reason I originally picked them here is because I typed Kyle Lowry's name 1,000 times tonight for injury report reasons because he's still technically on the Hornets payroll he's on their payroll the rest of the season. On the Hornets roster listing for one more day. He'll clear waivers tomorrow, and the reporting is he will sign with the 76ers. No one can claim him, so I'm assuming that's going to happen. And so that's why I picked the Sixers. But then Buddy Hield had an awesome game, and the Sixers beat the Cavs in Cleveland. So if you want to hear more on former Pacer Buddy Hield, Locked On 76ers is the way to go. Let's talk about current Pacers players. Aaron Nesmith, thumbs up, 8 for 13, gave a lot of energy. We'll get back to him. Pascal Siakam, 8 for 12, 18 points, thumbs up. Myles Turner, 8 for 13, 22 points, dominated to start the game. We'll get there. Andrew Nembhard, 5 for 7 for 10 points. That's 4 Pacers starters, all at over 60% shooting from the field, and the Pacers lost. That's how bad a lot of their other lineups and other combinations and other sequences in this game were. Their bench stunk. A lot of recent Pacer losses, you can point to their bench as being quite problematic. Before we get to individual stats and quality, Ben Mathurin, -7, got benched in the fourth quarter. I don't believe he played a single minute in the fourth. He did not play in the fourth. He looked really rough. Shot selection was wrong. Defense wasn't good. He did not deserve to play more. He's been sick. That's not to excuse his play. That's just a fact of, maybe his decision-making being cloudy, that he played bad. If he couldn't play better than that, perhaps he shouldn't have played at all. And he got benched in the fourth quarter for Ben Shepherd. They needed energy that badly. -7. Isaiah Jackson, who statistically was fine-ish. 2 for 3 from the field, 2 boards, 1 assist, 2 steals, a block in 16 and a half minutes. 4 fouls, that's not good. -15. Got absolutely waxed in his minutes. TJ McConnell, 4 for 7. 3 rebounds, 2 assists. Nice. 8 points. -17. He had 3 turnovers. They got smoked in his minutes. Doug McDermott, 0 for 4. 1 assist for his only stat. -12. Obi Toppin, 2 for 5. Both of those makes for threes. Got 4 boards. 6 points. -8. Ben Shepherd, those energy minutes, he was a -3. The bench that killed this Pacers team was Vasilije Micic, who the Hornets just got. He's big for a guard. He can pass. Not an awesome player. Seth Curry, who the Hornets just got. He was amazing. He had 18 points on 7 for 11 shooting, +15. Grant Williams, who the Hornets just got. 21 points. That was a team high. Defended pretty well. Bulky, strong. 8 free throw attempts. And Davis Bertans, who, guess what? They just got. They just got him. He didn't do anything. He was actually a -8. But that bench crushed the Pacers bench all night. That was the biggest matchup or individuals reason for this loss, I would say. Pacers bench had to do anything. They just had to be neutral because the Pacers starters were good enough, certainly, to win. And they didn't have it against that group. Also, new guy Trey Mann was great. He was a +10 for the Hornets starters. I mean, it was just really strange how much the bench struggled for the Pacers against that group in this one. They just felt like off. And that's such a lazy thing, but like they weren't in rhythm, they weren't in sync. TJ McConnell couldn't create as much space with his drives, and so there wasn't as much defensive rotation for Charlotte, and Mathurin wasn't getting where he needed to get on his drives. And so that all makes it harder for Isaiah Jackson to get his spots. And Toppin did well. He hit threes, but no, Doug McDermott missed his shots, and he's still learning the system and the terminology, right? Like everybody, all those guys weren't good and weren't in rhythm with everybody else. Even when they were mixing and matching with starters, like Siakam was the guy with the bench frequently in this game, that didn't do it. That wasn't good enough. Haliburton was plus 10. They dominated in his minutes. He only had 13 points. He had 3 turnovers. He had 12 assists and 6 rebounds, though. 3 for 8 from deep. Like, if he was a little more efficient, he finished 5 for 15. They might have won. He is not absolved from blame when you miss 10 shots, obviously. That was not a good game from him necessarily, even though his plus minus was fantastic. So the starting front court was all really great. Nesmith was spectacular, I thought. He continues to look awesome. 21 points, 3 boards, good defense. He and Andrew Nembhard combined for the same awesome sequence twice, where Nembhard stole it on a nice reach in at the perfect time with his hands to tip it away, and then Nesmith hustled and got it before anybody else, and then scored in transition. Nesmith had this sick poster dunk. I think it tied the game, or maybe put them down by 1 in the fourth quarter. Poor Nick Richards just got yammed on. I thought it'd be like, that's the thing that motivates the Pacers. Nope, the Hornets go on a 6-0 run right after that and put the game away. Nick Richards, by the way, very next possession, hangs in there, blocks Isaiah Jackson at the rim. Nick Richards, 13 and 9, and did not miss a shot. He was good. He's a good player. But Nesmith was great. Siakam, 8 for 12 on his way to 18 points. I want to talk more about him in a second, but he had no turnovers. He had 4 assists, 2 steals, 5 rebounds. Very high quality performance. Few mistakes for Siakam in this game. Turner was the reason the Pacers had a chance at all. He started this game amazing. I think he had their first 11 points. He made like 13 shots in a row dating back to the last game. 8 for 13, 5 free throws. He needed to rebound a little better, but plus 6. They won his minutes. 2 blocks, 2 steals, 1 assist, 22 points. That is a team high for the Pacers. Nembhard, 5 for 7, 7 assists, no turnovers, plus 8. Those guys were all good enough. Haliburton was fine and fit in well with them, but they needed more from the bench, and they got none of it at all. And that's how you lose to the Charlotte Hornets. So I said I'd come back to Siakam. That's how I want to close this. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about him because they play the Raptors on Wednesday, so you'll get a lot of Pascal Siakam talk tomorrow ahead of that game. Siakam was 8 for 12, and that's great. And he had 18 points. That's great. Can they feed Pascal Siakam the ball? Like, not overdo it. Don't overdo it. But he deserved the touches. He could not be stopped by anyone on the Hornets. The Pacers bench was lost. They were stacking lineups to intentionally get Siakam onto the floor, and yet they couldn't feed him the ball enough. He was routinely being guarded by, Brandon Miller was in foul trouble, so he wasn't out there as much. Miles Bridges is shorter than him, and he was just shooting over him. Cody Martin was guarding guards. Grant Williams is stocky-ish, but not an awesome defender. Bertans is slow. Like, they had no one for him. I thought they needed to feed Siakam the ball a lot more than they did, especially when Siakam was mix and match with those second units, especially in a game like this where he is a matchup nightmare for the opponents just because of his size. His speed is good against that Hornets defense. He was passing okay. They needed to get Pascal Siakam the ball more, right? Not every game. He's had some games where he's had some weird layup misses, or he's pirouetting too much, or he's forcing his issue a little bit. Not in this game. 12 shots was the 4th most on the Pacers. And granted, Turner and Nesmith should have been shooting. They were also hitting. But I think Siakam being closer to 15, 16 would have made more sense in this game. He was really good, and I thought he did not have enough involvement in the offense. On the season, he's shooting 15.5 shots per game with the Pacers. It's lower now after this game, but that was entering this night. If they had gotten closer to that number, I think that would have done wonders for their offense on maybe their worst offensive night of the entire season against the lowly Hornets. I mean, there's nothing else to say. They played awful against a team that they should be beating handily, and did beat handily earlier this month. Obviously, there were trades since then, but Pacers should be doing much better than that against the lowly Hornets, and they didn't. And now they're 30-25 instead of 31-24. They have 5 losses against these crappy teams. a miserable performance. It had to be better, and my camera's out of focus, which means it's time to end the show for you YouTube people. I'm not sure when that happened. I apologize. We'll be back tomorrow. They play the Raptors on Wednesday for their last game before the break. I want to talk about in more detail Siakam since the trade, right? Really dive into what he's done, what he's doing for the Pacers, because they returned to where he spent his entire career before this. And in the spirit of talking about players who were traded, we'll talk a little about Doug McDermott, who still has not made a shot for the Pacers, but had an assist, put his first stat. All right. He's got to make some shots for this team. On tomorrow's show, Jay Rigdon's going to join us. It's been a while since Jay's been on. Looking forward to that. We'll talk about that game on Thursday, get into all-star stuff this weekend. Should be really fun. Lots of fun stuff coming despite a very unfun Pacers game Monday night. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show. Back tomorrow. Till then, everybody, have a wonderful day.